As she sat watching, there comes a moment, often subtle, almost imperceptible at first, when the empath begins to see, not through the lens of hope or projection, not through the idealized image they've tried to hold on to, but through the clarity that pain has slowly carved into their perception. That moment is the psychological awakening, and it is the beginning of everything. Because when the empath starts to realize that what they've endured wasn't love, it was control, manipulation, and exploitation masked in charm and false affection, then something internal begins to shift. That shift is not only emotional, it's ontological. It strikes at the very foundation of how they understand themselves, others, and the world. What's fascinating and tragic is that empaths often stay in these relationships far longer than most people can comprehend. Not because they're naive or weak, but because they carry an unconscious loyalty to healing, to fixing, to believing that love can conquer all. They believe that if they just love harder, if they just understand deeper, they can reach the wounded core of the narcissist and rescue what must surely be a damaged soul crying out for connection. But here's the brutal truth. A narcissist doesn't want to be healed. They want to be worshipped. They don't want vulnerability. They want submission. And the empath unknowingly feeds this dynamic by offering their most sacred virtues, compassion, forgiveness, patience, to someone who only uses them as tools for further control. But the psyche cannot tolerate contradiction forever. Eventually, the dissonance becomes unbearable. The empath begins to notice that their anxiety spikes in the presence of the narcissist. They begin to track patterns, the way praise turns to punishment, the way tenderness is transactional, the way love always comes with a hidden cost. And most importantly, they begin to question a narrative that once seemed so certain. Maybe it's not me. Maybe I'm not the problem here. This is the awakening. This is the moment the narcissist begins to lose power, and they sense it. Often before the empath even articulates it, they feel the shift. They start to panic. You see, narcissists are highly attuned to power dynamics. The moment you stop emotionally investing, the moment you begin to observe rather than react, you become a threat. Because you are no longer supplying them with the emotional fuel they need to feel superior, important, or in control. The empath's awakening is not just a moment of insight. It is an existential rupture. It forces a confrontation with deeply embedded beliefs. Am I only worthy when I'm needed? Have I confused love with suffering? These are not easy questions. They demand courage, and they demand responsibility. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. You can't go back to pretending that the chaos is normal or that the devaluation is deserved. Your nervous system knows. Your soul knows. And here's the part that the narcissist never anticipates. The empath, once awake, becomes extraordinarily powerful, not in a domineering sense, but in a deeply grounded, self-possessed way. The very qualities that made them vulnerable to abuse, sensitivity, empathy, depth, become their weapons of liberation. They begin to understand boundaries not as barriers to connection, but as declarations of self-worth. They begin to listen to their intuition, to trust the discomfort that used to be dismissed or minimized. They stop over-explaining. They stop apologizing for existing. This is the moment the narcissist fears most. Not the shouting match, not the breakup text, not even being blocked on social media. What they fear is the quiet, composed presence of someone who no longer dances to their tune. Someone who sees the game and refuses to play it. That's when the power dynamic shatters. That's when the narcissist realizes their mask has slipped. And the mirror they once used to see their inflated image has cracked. This kind of awakening often comes with grief. Not just the loss of the person, but the loss of the fantasy. In your reality for you. And that's the message I want to leave you with in this moment. The day the empath begins to see clearly is the day the narcissist illusion begins to dissolve. Power that relies on deception cannot withstand the light of awareness. Once you awaken, you begin the process of becoming free, not just from the narcissist, but from every lie you were ever told about who you needed to be in order to be loved. You don't owe anyone your silence, your suffering, or your self-betrayal. Your clarity is your freedom. And freedom, once claimed, becomes the foundation for everything else that truly matters. Seeing the world go by. Something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. What's often misunderstood in emotionally abusive dynamics is the quiet but enormous influence the empath holds in the relationship. It's easy to look at the narcissist, the louder one, the more assertive one, and assume that they are the one with all the power. But that's an illusion. The narcissist's dominance is not self-sustaining, it's parasitic. Their sense of superiority, their inflated self-worth, their carefully curated persona, all of it feeds off something. And more often than not, what they're feeding off is the empath's presence. You see, the empath becomes the stage on which the narcissist performs. Without the empath's constant affirmation, their identity begins to crumble. It's not just about control, it's about reflection. The narcissist needs someone to reflect their inflated image back to them. That means admiration, compliance, emotional responsiveness. All things the empath is often willing to offer, especially early in the relationship. But the tragedy is that this dynamic is not mutual. The empath gives deeply, often sacrificing their own needs, while the narcissist takes consistently, feeling entitled to what they have not earned. The psychological term for this is narcissistic supply. And the empath, because of their sensitivity and intuition, becomes the most valuable supplier. Not because they're weak, but because they feel deeply. They love thoroughly. They interpret pain as a sign that they must try harder, love better, give more. This makes them ideal prey, in a sense, for a narcissist who has no intention of engaging in reciprocal healing or transformation. The narcissist doesn't actually love the empath. That's a hard truth. They love the feeling of being adored by the empath. They love being the center of the empath's emotional world. And they love the fact that the empath is willing to bend, to accommodate, to excuse bad behavior in the name of understanding. But none of this is real connection. It's consumption. It's use. And once the empath begins to understand this, something fundamental changes. Because the moment the empath pulls back, not even physically, just emotionally, the narcissist feels it like a fracture in the system. Suddenly the control doesn't work. The emotional manipulation doesn't land the same way. The rage, the guilt tripping, the silent treatments, none of it brings the empath running back with apologies and tears. And that's terrifying to the narcissist. Because without that emotional reaction, they're left with themselves. And that's the one place they never want to be. Now, let's go a bit deeper. What's actually happening here is existential. The narcissist builds their identity on the reactions of others. They don't know who they are outside of how they're perceived. That's why losing the empath's gaze is catastrophic. It's not just about losing a relationship. It's about losing the mirror that tells them they exist in the way they've always imagined. It's identity death. And that is why they fight so hard to keep the empath invested. Love bombing, guilt threats, promises of change. Because they know, consciously or not, that their psychological equilibrium depends on the empath's participation. But here's the empowering reality. The empath was the power source all along. That patience, that emotional depth, that relentless capacity to care, those weren't weaknesses. Those were strengths being exploited. And when the empath starts to recognize that truth, the dynamic flips entirely. The narcissist without supply is exposed. There's no one left to validate the illusion. And for perhaps the first time, they're forced to confront the emptiness they've been avoiding. And here's something even more profound. The empath doesn't have to become aggressive or cruel to reclaim their power. They don't have to mirror the narcissist's tactics. All they have to do is withdraw their energy. That quiet detachment, that refusal to continue playing a rigged emotional game is what truly destabilizes the narcissist. It's the empath's stillness that becomes revolutionary. Because it's in that stillness that the narcissist can no longer hide from themselves. This is why walking away, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, is such a decisive act. It's not just a step toward freedom. It's the end of the narcissist's illusion of dominance. The empath's departure is the revelation of a truth the narcissist has spent their entire life avoiding. They are not powerful without someone else to control. Let that sink in. Power that depends on someone else's self-betrayal is not power. It's dependence masked as strength. And so, I'll leave you with this. When you realize that your compassion was being used as currency, you must also realize that withdrawing it is not cruelty, it is clarity. And clarity is where true power begins. There's a moment in every toxic relationship, especially one involving a narcissist and an empath, when words begin to fail. And interestingly, that moment doesn't come from the narcissist. It comes from the empath. It's a silence that emerges not from fear, not from confusion, but from clarity. It's the silence of someone who has finally stopped explaining themselves. Someone who's done pleading to be seen, heard, or understood. Someone who no longer needs to justify their existence or their boundaries. That kind of silence is not weakness, it's power. This is something few people understand. Narcissists thrive on emotional chaos. They don't just crave attention, they feed on reaction. Rage, tears, confusion, panic. These are all forms of energy. And energy, to a narcissist, is control. If they can evoke a strong emotional reaction from you, then they still have influence over your internal state. That's what they want. They don't necessarily want you to love them or admire them. They want you to feel them consistently, unavoidably, and complete. Because if they can control how you feel, then they still own a part of your mind. But here's the paradox. When the empath stops reacting, when they stop arguing, stop defending, stop explaining, the narcissist begins to unravel. The rage intensifies. The manipulation becomes more desperate. The guilt tripping more theatrical. Why? Because the silence of the empath is not just a withdrawal of noise, it is the absence of control. And for the narcissist, that absence is intolerable. It threatens their very identity. Think about it. Narcissistic rage isn't about strength. It's a scream into the void of their own insecurity. It's the panic of someone who fears irrelevance. And when their most reliable source of emotional supply The empath goes silent. They're left to face the terrifying reality that their power was never real. It only existed as long as someone else agreed to respond to it. Now, that silence doesn't come easily for the empath. It's often preceded by years of internal war between their desire to fix, to help, to be kind, and the dawning realization that no amount of love can change someone who's committed to staying the same. That moment of silence is the result of deep inner work, of confronting hard truths. It's the empath finally understanding that speaking into dysfunction only echoes back as pain, and so they choose stillness, they choose space, and in doing so they choose themselves. This silence is not passive, it's not avoidance, it's an act of strength, perhaps the most profound act of strength an empath can perform. Because to hold your ground without explaining it, to detach without causing harm, to say, this is no longer for me, without screaming it, that requires emotional maturity. It requires discipline. It requires the courage to walk away from chaos without needing to burn the bridge on your way out. The narcissist will interpret this silence as betrayal. They'll call it abandonment. They'll weaponize guilt and claim you never cared. But these are merely attempts to provoke a reaction. Don't mistake them for truth. The truth is this: silence in the context of abuse or manipulation is often the first sign of healing. It is the empath beginning to exist independently outside of someone else's dysfunction. It's the reclaiming of narrative, of identity, of voice. And let's be very clear, this silence is not the end of the empath's story, it's the beginning of it. Because once that silence settles in, something remarkable happens. The empath begins to hear themselves again. Their intuition grows sharper, their thoughts clearer. They begin to notice all the ways they were dimming their light to protect someone else's ego. And they realize that peace, real inner peace, feels nothing like walking on eggshells.